now that we've seen how the web works between a server and a browser, and they're interacting via these GET requests and such, right? Let's dive into the backend side and Flask, how we could build out that backend side using a Python library called Flask. There's a lot of different libraries out there. Flask is one that I think is worth checking out. It's pretty minimal, and we'll dive into that in a bit. So Flask, their motto is web development one drop at a time. I'm not so sure that but it does kind of make sense when we see what Flask is. So Flask, right? They define themselves as they define the whole thing as a micro framework. Micro meaning there's not much to it, right? It's sort of a framework, but it's not a whole framework that gives you everything you need, right? It gives you only the minimum amount you can need, the micro amount you can need. So as they say, right, they provide a very simple glue layer to the best that Python has to offer. They're just that glue layer, right? There's nothing else. So micro with dependencies, right? One of their core principles. They're micro. There are two dependencies. One of them is, I'm not going to say it, wait, workzug, and the second one is Jinja 2. These are the two libraries that it relies on for WSGI support from the former, and for templating from the latter, from Jinja. So they make one choice on template engine. It is baked in with Jinja. That might change over time, right? It might be open to more templating engines, but right now it's just Jinja. The choice is made for you. And then the workzug-based WSGI and automatic routing system. So WSGI, right, is the interface between Python and the actual web service. That's complex, and there are maybe two libraries in Python to do this. They've chosen one of them and run with it. So you get those two choices made for you, and through workzug, the automatic routing system is also defined. Another couple choices to be aware of in it, to communicate on requests, they use thread locals. So every request object, right, those are communicated to other things in the same thread with a thread local variable. So it can be weird. Probably won't encounter it too much ourselves. And, on this micro side, right, so a couple things. Flask will never have a database layer, right? It's not going to have a form library. A form library being like forms on the front end for like a login form. Those are not part of Flask, and they never will be, right? There are other libraries to accomplish both of these. There are database connectors libraries, and there are form libraries to build these out, right? It doesn't have either of these. A contrast, right, on the Python side would be something like Django, which does have a form library, is baked in a bunch of different database layers, right? It's not micro at all. It is a framework. So a micro framework right here, there's not much to it, right? But it does just what we need it to. Diving into a couple of those, one of the things I mentioned is there's an explicit application object. I did or didn't mention. I did now. Right, and what this means is you actually call Flask of, here it's the name of the script, to define the app, right? So we've actually defined the app. And that application object is explicit, right? What I mean by that is it could look like this. This is what it could be if it was implicit, right? So all you have to do is import route, and then you just go ahead, right? You never actually defined your app. So there's a lot of reasons that you might want to define an app, right? Implicit require there's only one at a time, so you can't test 20 versions of your app at the same time. Right, by being explicit, right, you can use different package names, and it's pretty easy actually to split your Flask app into like 5 different files if you want, because you're explicit about what what piece is actually the application. Which of the 5 defines the core app. Well, you can say that more easily. And just in general, right, the developers said we like being explicit better than being implicit, right? So those are some of the core design choices that make up Flask. One note I do want to make is develop for the web with caution, right? We're going to be building a web app. Always keep security in mind when building a web application. It's really easy to build something insecure. There are many ways the security of a web application be compromised. There's a link in here, which I'll post to the video of of just like a list of ways that web applications can be compromised. The one maybe you're familiar with is SQL injection. Right, there's a lot of different ways that a web application can be broken. So you kind of have to keep this in mind. It's you gotta be a little smart when you're building a web app out. Okay, that note aside, let's get started to build one. So getting started in Flask, right? There's a tutorial. Again, I'll share the link to that. And this is their Hello World app. We actually saw this code already. This is the first snippet of code I shared. And to run it, right, we can set the option to development on by passing Flask in. We're going to give it the name of the app, hello.py, right, and then go ahead and run, Flask run. So this is really all there is to it. We'll have a working web app. So I actually want to go in and build this out. So let's go ahead and do this. So let's run a Flask app. So here we go. Let's take this bit of code. So let's go into, let's make Scratch Flask demo, right? Okay, now we've got our editor open. There's nothing in Flask demo. So let's drop our code in that we just copied, right? Let's save this as, maybe we want to save it as hello.py. We could really give it any name. Here, right, we've just told it use the name of the script as the app, right? We could put hello.py in there if we want. Underscore name is going to be the automatic bit. So now we can go ahead and run this. So let's jump over to the terminal, and we can go ahead and run it just like this. There we go. We've got a local web server, and if we go here, hello world, right? It worked. So that's really it to Flask. If we wanted to do things that are a little more complex, right, we could do our, if main loop, right, we could do, I think, app.run, right? This will actually, we could give it the development option. Turn off development mode for this, right? We could pass in SSL options if we want. This would allow us to run our app, if we wanted to run it just from, something like this, Python 3.8, hello.py. Develop. Oh, no. Dev. Yeah, guess and check. Okay, and again, right, it still works. We have a live app going up here. So good to go. Let's do something a little more fun than this. Maybe, right, we have an index that's hello world, but maybe we actually want maybe some sort of API in Flask, right? So if we want to extend this a little bit, right, we could have an API, and maybe we want our API to take an optional parameter. So here, right, file name, right, that's going to be parsed out of the URL, and we might get it as an option here, default none, right? And then what we could do, we could say if file name, let's call this our API, if file name, right, we'll, have to load pandas, right? We could read CSV, if file name, right? And then we could return something like pandas.toJSON, right? Or yeah, maybe something like this, data frame. Right, so we could return the JSON object of that. Here, the dict object of that. Yep, toDict. So return the dict object, right? We don't actually want to go load a file right now, so maybe we'll just do this. We'll say, our data, right, is going to be A1, B2, right? We have some data like this. We go ahead and return D. Maybe if it's not a file, right, we'd, make a database query. So, import, right, we'd import SQL Alchemy, right, SSA, right? We could go and make a query of the database, right? We could even take in data, right, by defining a post method and, import and run a machine learning model against it, right? And then maybe, here again, let's just go return. In this case, we'll know which route we got, right? Return 2, 3, return D. So in this case, right, we're returning a dictionary object. Beforehand, right, we returned a hello world. Let's dive into this response a little bit. So if we go back to our browser, if we open up the dev tools, right, oh, they popped out. Open up the dev tools. Then we get something like this. So, right, we go to our network, we see what was defined, right? I made this request, we made a GET request, came back okay. Response headers, content like 12, text HTML, right? This is telling our browser it's HTML, and that's what it got rendered as. Server, workzeg, Python 3.8. There we go. That's about all there is to it. Right, but let's go query our API and see what comes back differently. So here, right, let's go run our API. Oop. Spelled file name wrong. And we had debug on, so it worked. Yeah, we got this response back, right? Okay, cool. We didn't give it a file name, so we got 2.3, which is what we expected. If we go and look at what was returned, go look at API, you can see actually Flask for us noticed that it was a dictionary and returned content type application JSON. So we can actually go and specify these headers ourselves if we want. So the way that Flask works is here you can return a dictionary or a string. A string will be wrapped in the default stuff, the most default text HTML. You return a dictionary, it'll set it as JSON. You can also return the full response object, Flask response object. And then you also have options, right? So here we could return a status code, right, of 200. And we could also return, some sort of header value. So that's going to return a header in our response. If we go and reload this, oop, what is it saying here? If main, yep, forgot a parenthesis. Lots of errors. Okay, we go look at this. Then you can actually see we set a different header, right? We can set whatever response headers we wanted. And, we still gave it a 200. I don't know what it'll do with a different response type, but, we could try to give it a 201 and 201. Okay, means created. Yeah. 404, right? We could give it to. So anyway, right, that's a request. We can go and, right, let's do something a little more fun. Let's at least return the file name. Let's go make a query at that file name API. So API hello, right? There we got hello back, right? So it is dynamic, right? And here, right, we're still going to get a status 200. So that's Flask running, and you can, I think, hopefully at this point you can see kind of how with Flask and this code here, we could go and build a web app to do all sorts of stuff. Where we're in pure Python and we can run away. When I mentioned the thread locals, what it means is that these actual request objects, so you have the request object available here, you could actually go and that's going to be local to the thread. So it's not a global, but yeah, I think you can see here how we can go and really build out any type of app we might want in Flask. A lot of possibilities here to respond to requests.